So in this video, we're going to learn how to build skyboxes. We'll learn how to use AI to generate these amazing skyboxes. And then we'll also learn how to communicate between a window and an immersive space so that we can dynamically change skyboxes. So what are skyboxes? Well, skyboxes are a technique used in 3D game programming to create an illusion of a larger than life background. They are typically panoramic images, usually 6 or more images stitched together seamlessly so that when it wraps around a large mesh, it gives you an illusion of the environment. If you think of that large cube, this bit here would map onto the top side of the cube, and this bit here would be mapped to the left side of the cube, and this to the right, and this to the back, and this to the front. That way, this panoramic image would entirely cover the cube, and when you look around, you would get the illusion that you are actually wrapped in an environment like this. Now I'm going to show you one tool that I found that uses AI to create generative skyboxes. All you got to do is type in the skybox you want. So I'm going to type in, say, common serene forest with a lake. Then the cool thing about this is we could even choose the style of the skybox that we want. I'm going to choose this guy here. Now let's click generate. Wow, this looks great already. So you can see if you just drag it around, you can see what it looks like. So I'm going to download this one. I'm going to save it as a JPG file. I'm going to generate 2 more. So let's try a beach with a clear sky. Awesome, that looks even better. Wow, it just looks so magical. Better than anything I've seen on Google, to be honest. So that's good. I'm going to download this one too as a JPG image. And then finally, I'm going to get one last one. Instead of radial painting, I'm going to change the style. Now I'm going to make a realistic one. Let's see what we get for this. Great, that looks like quite a realistic forest, right? Let's implement this in our visionOS app. Great, so now for visionOS app, as usual, first thing, we're going to create a visionOS app and call it VR Skyboxes. Now for the initial scene, we'll keep it at a window. And now for the immersive space, make sure we use RealityKit to render. And we're going to start with the full immersive space, right? Now let's see what we get. Great, so we get a lot of boilerplate code. I'm going to delete all of it. So right from here, I'm going to make the body empty. Don't worry about the errors for now. Let's just pass in a text to keep the errors happy. So text, hello world. The starting point of the app, this guy here, you can see we got the window with the initial view, and then we also have an immersive space. We're just going to delete the window, and we're just going to have an immersive space like this. So now by default, when the visionOS app starts, it will display the immersive space first, right? Because that's the scene defined first. Now to do that, let's go to the immersive view. And now here in the immersive view, we're going to delete again everything. So we're going to call a reality view, and we're going to choose this guy here. So this would give us the content, which contains all the entities in the reality view. And what we're going to do here is we're going to create a skybox and then add that to the list of entities that's shown in the reality view. So first, I'm going to write a function to create the skybox. First, we define a mesh, which is a large sphere. After we got the mesh, we're going to apply a material. This is the skybox image. And then we'll create an entity with a model component that has a mesh and a material defined here. So that way, we got a large sphere with the skybox image mapped to the surface of the sphere. And when the user is placed inside the sphere, when he looks around, he sees that environment. That way, you get the illusion of the background being real. So this function should return an entity. So the skybox mesh is going to be mesh resource generate sphere, and it's going to be a large sphere, right? So this would create a large sphere mesh. And then for the material, we're going to use a simple unlit material for now. Now we want to apply a texture to this material. So we're going to do let skybox texture equals texture resource dot load an image with a name. And this is where we import the image that we got through the AI generated skyboxes, right? We need to load that into the assets here first. So first I'm going to create an image set. And the first one, I'm going to name it forest. I'm going to click here and go to wherever you stored that images. So I stored it in this folder. You can see I've got the 3 skybox images, 1, 2, and 3. For this guy here, I'm going to choose the forest one. It's imported that. And similarly, I'm going to create another image asset for the fantasy one. Get the image, fantasy, it's imported that. So forest, fantasy, and now the last one is the river, this guy here. Great, so now I've got 3 image assets, which represents my 3 Skybox images, the JPG file. So now if I go back in the create Skybox function, I've created the material and I'm loading a texture. And in this case, I'm going to load the forest one. Now, because this call can throw, I'm going to mark this with a try like that. And then guard let, and if this does not exist, simply return nil. Great. We loaded a Skybox texture, which represents the Skybox image, in this case, the forest one. Now we want to apply this texture to this material, right? And the way we do that is we change the color of this material. So we do Skybox material color. We can initialize the color with a tint and a texture. So we're going to initialize this with the texture resource, and the texture resource is the one we loaded here, the Skybox texture. So we're going to pass that here. Skybox material is a let constant. Obviously, because we're modifying the Skybox material here, we need to make sure this is a var and not a let. Great. So what we have here is we got a Skybox material. We loaded the Skybox texture, which loads the image from our assets file, and we applied that texture to this material by changing the color. Now we can create an entity out of the mesh and the material. So I'm going to create let Skybox entity equals entity. So I'm going to get the list of components for this entity. I'm going to set a new component, and that's going to be the model component with a mesh and a material. So the model component gives an entity its visual appearance, right? We define that visual appearance with a mesh and a material. The mesh in this case would be the Skybox mesh, and the material would be the Skybox material. So now we created a Skybox entity, and we added a model component to it, which represents the visual appearance of the Skybox. Now let's return that. Return Skybox entity. Awesome, so that's the create Skybox function done. And now I'm going to call that here. So in the reality view, let Skybox entity equals create Skybox. And then I'm going to add that entity to the list of entities in the reality view. And we do that by content add Skybox entity. Oh, because this is an optional, we need to unwrap it. So let's guard let, and if this does not exist, we return. We forgot to do one thing here. What we've done here, we've mapped the image to the outer surface of the large sphere again, which means when the user is inside the sphere, when he looks around, he sees the inner sphere and not the outer sphere where the image is applied, right? So we need to map the image to the inner surface, not the outer surface of the sphere. Map image to inner surface of sphere. So the simple hack for that is take the Skybox entity, get its scale, and then we can init, and then we can invert the x-axis -1 and keep the rest the same. So this would simply invert the Skybox so that the image is applied to the inner surface. That way we get the intended effect. Let's go back to our Skybox app. We only have one type of scene, in this case an immersive space, and inside that we display the immersive view. We need to change one additional setting in the info plist. So go to info plist, and then inside the scene manifest, we want to change the preferred default scene session role. Instead of a window application session role, we want to change this to immersive space application session role. So that's all you got to do. Let's run this on a simulator now. Now you can see when the app first starts, we are directly inside this VR environment. Looks beautiful, right? We're actually inside this large sphere that we created, and the panoramic image of the Skybox is mapped to the inner surface of the sphere. So that way we get the illusion that we are actually in the environment. Look up and down, obviously there's the watermark. You have to pay for the AI tool to get rid of that. Now, I don't want to stop here, right? In a typical VR experience, I actually prefer to have the option to choose different environments. So that's what we're going to add next to this demo app. We're going to create a window, and inside the window, we'll have the option to choose different Skyboxes. So first thing we need to do is we need to add a window, which will have the options for different Skyboxes. And when you click on one, it should dynamically change that Skybox. So right now, if you go to the starting point of our app here, in the list of scenes, we got an immersive space. So this is the VR bit. And now we want to add in a window. So this would be a window group with an ID of, let's say, Skybox controls. So let's create that view here. So a new SwiftUI view. Let's call this Skybox controls view. So this is the Skybox control view, which we'll design soon, but let's just go back to the starting point, and in the window group, let's present that here. So Skybox controls view. Put this after the immersive space, right? Because we want the immersive space to be shown first by default, And we need to decide when to open the window, but we'll come to that later. First, let's design the window. So the window is here. Let's just move this guy here. Let's create an H stack here, H stack. And then in the H stack, let's do button with the label here, this guy here. So this will have an action and the label would be an icon instead of a text. So to get the icon, we'll use image and we'll do system name. And here we're going to use an SF symbol that represents a tree for now. Great. So this would be, say, the forest skybox. And now when we click on the button, we should change skybox. Obviously, we'll add the logic for that later, but for now, we're just designing the window. So what we could do is we could just copy paste and have 3 of these here like this. This is not good coding practice because it's just repeating yourself. So the way we do that is we could select the button, right click and extract subview. So this has created a new view that represents just the button. So we're going to rename this to the Skybox button. Replace that here as well. So Skybox button. Now inside the H tag, we got a Skybox button, just one of them. Now we don't want to hard code the image icon and the action that's going to be executed once the button's pressed. So let's abstract those. First, for the function, I'm going to pass in a closure. So on click. This would be a closure which has no input and it returns nothing as well. So that's the function that we want to execute when we click on the button. So we're going to do on click here, pass that guy here, and we're going to abstract away the icon as well. So we're going to create a new variable called var icon name. This will be of type string. I'm going to pass that guy here. Now if you call the Skybox button again, now you can see it has an on click function. This is the closure that gets executed here when we click on the button. So that's how closures work. And then for the icon name, I'm going to pass in this case, tree. And we're going to create 2 more buttons like this. And here I'm going to do moon. Great. So now we got a new button with a different icon. And finally, we want 1 more button. So I'm going to copy paste this guy here. And now I'm going to type in, let's say forest. I don't think there's an SF symbol for that. So I'm going to go to my SF symbol package. I'm going to choose, let's say, sunset, right? That's a good one. So I'm just going to copy the text here, copy name and sunmin. Obviously, when we click on each of these buttons, we want them to do different things, which we'll come to later. Right now, we're just designing the view. Now let's just make the window size a little smaller. So I'm going to go back to the starting point, and in the window group, I'm going to give it a default size of width and height of 30. So that's the window designed. But one thing here, this window is not shown by default, right? Again, in the scene, whatever is defined first gets shown. So right now it's the immersive space. We got the VR space, but the window is not shown. We need to programmatically open that. The way we do that is just the same way we do it for immersive spaces. We get an environment action, which is called open window group, which lets you programmatically open a window. So I'm going to collapse reality view here. When the reality view first appears, on appear perform, we present the window. That's what we want to do. Now to programmatically open it, we got an environment action called open window. So this is the action stored in the view's environment, which you can use to open a window with a specific ID. Now on appear, I'm going to do open window. This should accept an ID, and the ID would be the ID of the window that we defined here. And the ID here is Skybox control. So I'm going to copy that and I'm going to paste that here. So here, when the reality view first appears, we programmatically open the window that we defined. So now if we run the app, we should see the window inside the VR view. Let's see if that's working. Great. Now we got the VR world as usual, and we got the window too. And now what we want to do is when we click on a different Skybox button, we should change the Skybox environment that we see. So this way, when we click on different buttons, we could change the environment, the VR environment that we are in. And this is a very common use case for many different VR experiences you might build. So let's do that next. So now to dynamically change the Skybox, we have to go to the immersive view, right? So if you go to the immersive view, you can see here we create a Skybox. And inside the create Skybox function, if we go in here, you see we create a mesh, a large sphere, and we apply the material which defines the Skybox, right? So the material contains the image, which currently is hard-coded to the forest one. So if you go to our image assets, we got a forest here. and we got a river, which we have not used yet, and we also got a fantasy one. But before going into this bit, we need to do one thing. We need to find a way to communicate between the window and the immersive space, because they both are separate scenes, right? So if you go back to our starting point, you see the window and the immersive space are separate scenes. Inside the immersive space, we present the immersive view, which contains the skybox. And inside the window group, we present the control window, which contains the buttons which will change the skybox dynamically. So we need to find a way to communicate between these two scenes, because when we press the buttons inside the skybox controls view, we want to tell the immersive view to change the skybox. So there are different ways to communicate between scenes in an iOS app, but we're going to choose the environment option. In SwiftUI, you could pass values to the environment, and all the child views that's inside that view would get access to that environment value. And anytime you change the environment value within the children view, the value would change in the environment. So it's typically used for storing, say, like settings or configurations, which would need to be accessed throughout the app, right? And the skybox is a very good example of a setting. It's a setting that you change to change the skybox as shown. So it's very appropriate here to inject the skybox settings inside the app's environment so that any view could either read or modify it. So that way we could communicate between these views. This will become clearer once we implement it. So let's implement it now. So first, let's create a class called Skybox Settings. This would be an observable object. And inside here, we would create a publish property, which would be the current skybox. So here we have a Skybox Settings class, which is an observable object. Inside here, we create a published variable called current skybox, which is of type string. By making it observable and marking this current skybox setting as a published property, what we're saying is anytime we change the current skybox value, the changed value could be observed by any views or classes that are observing this value. So this is the settings. Now, in the main starting point of the app, we're going to create an instance of this class. So I'm going to do observed object. You can see it's a property wrapper type that subscribes to an observable object. So by observed object, var skybox setting, and this object we want to pass into both the immersive view and the skybox controls view. So what we do is we go to the immersive view first, click environment, and then we pass in the skybox settings object that we just created here. Again, similarly, we go to the skybox controls view and then environment. So you can see this places an observable object in the view's environment. So this is exactly what we created here. We created a Skybox Settings class, which is an observable object, and we're passing that here once we've instantiated here. So we go Skybox Settings. So now first we want to change the Skybox settings when we click on a button, right? So we go to the Skybox Controls view and we get access to the environment Skybox Settings object by typing in environment object. So if you read this, it says a property wrapper type for an observable object that a parent or ancestor view supplies. And remember, that's exactly what we did here. In the parent view here, we supplied the Skybox settings, which is an observable object, to the Skybox controls view. So then we could here, using the environment object property wrapper, we could access that Skybox settings object. And this would be of type Skybox. So here, with this guy here, we could get access to the settings value. Now what we can do is we can modify this value, right? We can do Skybox settings dot current Skybox and change that to, let's say, the image name of this guy here. Let's keep the tree one, the forest one. So Skybox settings would be forest. And then say change Skybox. Now similarly, we're going to repeat this for the other two buttons. And here, instead of forest for the moon one, let's say the fantasy guy here. We got fantasy here. Now finally, let's do it for the last button. So now here for the sun guy, we're going to display the river skybox. So we're going to change the skybox setting here to the river one. So at this point, whenever we click on any of these buttons, the object should be updated with the latest skybox value. And that value would be available to read from the immersive view as well, because it's the same object that's passed on here. And let's get access to the same environment object. Environment object var Skybox settings, which is of type Skybox settings. Now let's test this out if that's actually working by printing the value to the console. So if you go to the reality view has a method called update. So what this guy would do is it updates the reality view whenever a state variable in this immersive view has changed. So first, we're just going to print the latest Skybox settings just to see if the communication between the windows and the immersive view is working. And then later on, once we've established that, we'll update the current Skybox. That's what we'll do here. So let's just first print the Skybox settings. We're literally going to do print latest Skybox settings is Skybox settings dot current Skybox. So the way it works is inside this update method, anytime the Skybox settings dot current Skybox, that value changes, this guy gets executed. Hope that made sense. So now let's see if this is actually working. So I'm going to bring the console to view and I'm going to run this. Oh, there's an error. So it says requires that Skybox settings confirm to observable. That's because it's not environment, it's environment object that we're passing, right? Replace this guy with environment object. So if you don't know what I mean, just go read the description. It supplies an environment object, which is an observable object, to the views hierarchy. So that was the reason for the error. So we changed that. Now let's build it. Change the buttons around. If I go to the console, you can see the values being updated, right? So what's happening here is anytime we click the different buttons, the Skybox settings environment object is being updated to the latest Skybox settings, which we print here in the reality view update method. And the update method, it executes this whenever this guy changes. And this guy is changed from the control view, i.e. the window here. So the communication between the window and the immersive space is working. Every time we change the Skybox settings value from the window, the change is being reflected in the immersive view here, which we print here. Now, instead of printing the latest Skybox settings, we want to use the latest value here and update the actual Skybox being shown. We want to fetch that already created entity, the Skybox entity, and then update its material with the latest current Skybox image. For that, I'm going to create a separate function. So let's collapse the reality view for now. So reality view, we got the creation function here and the update function. And then here, I'm going to create a new function called private func update Skybox. So the update Skybox function, we want to update it with the latest Skybox. So let's call this new Skybox name. And this would be of type string. And we also want to pass in the content of the RealityKit, right? Inside here, we'll write the code to get access to the Skybox entity from the list of Skybox entities, which is already in the reality view content here. And we're going to take that entity and update its material to reflect the new Skybox. Get Skybox entity from content, and then we're going to update its material to latest Skybox. But first, call that function here. So inside reality view's update closure over here, we're going to do update Skybox, and we're going to pass in the latest Skybox name, which would be Skybox settings.current Skybox, which we get from the Skybox settings environment object. The content would be this guy here. So content. And let's just remove this print statement. Right, so now here, what we need to do is we need to grab the Skybox entity that we created from the content, right? From the list of entities in the reality view at the moment. But there's no way to uniquely identify that entity yet. So we need a way to uniquely identify that entity in the content. So to do that, what we can do is inside the create Skybox function, the function that gets called when we first create the Skybox entity. Here we create a mesh, a material, and the entity. We can also assign the entity a name. You can see here there's a function called .name, and the name, we can assign it a unique name, and in this case, let's name it Skybox, right? So this way, this entity, when it's created, it will have a name of Skybox, and we can uniquely identify that Skybox by the name. So now, whenever the Skybox is first created, it will have a name associated with it, and we can use that name to retrieve that Skybox entity here. So here, when we call the update Skybox function, what we can do is we can do content.entities. This gives you the list of entities that's currently in the reality view. And then you'll see there's a function called firstWhere. So this returns the first element of the list of entities that satisfies the given predicate. If we expand it, what it will do is it could return the first entity that matches this condition. So in this case, the condition is simple. We want the entity.name equals Skybox. So what this guide essentially does is it looks through all the entities inside the content, and it loops through each one of them here. If the entity's name matches Skybox, which represents a Skybox entity, this will return true. In our case, there's only one entity in the content anyway, so it's not a big deal. But if you have multiple entities inside your reality view, this is how you would retrieve the specific entity with the name Skybox. So Skybox entity equals what we get from this condition. Great, so now we got access to the Skybox entity from the content. What we can do is first create a texture out of this. So guard-let Skybox texture equals texture resource.load named and the name of the texture that we want to load is the new Skybox name. Remember, this would load the image defined here as a texture, and this is exactly the new Skybox name. We're going to mark this with a try, and if we can't load it, we're just going to return. Let's rename this to updated Skybox texture. So this represents the latest Skybox texture that we want to apply to the Skybox entity. And now, as usual, we create a material, var Skybox material, and this would be an unlit material. And then we're going to apply the texture that we just created now to the material. So texture.color equals init with texture, and the texture would be init.the updated Skybox texture. Again, let's rename this to updated Skybox material. Great. Now we got the material ready with the latest Skybox texture. We can do Skybox entity dot components, and we can set a new component. And the new component would be, again, a model component with a mesh and a material. And the mesh would be a large sphere. So mesh resource dot generate sphere and large one. Let's just do it like this so it's a bit clearer. And the material would be the updated Skybox material. So here all we have is we get access to the Skybox entity inside the content, and then we update the Skybox material with the latest value of the texture, and then we create a new model component out of this mesh and the updated material, and we set that component to the Skybox entity. So what happens here is the previous model component assigned when we created the entity will be replaced by this updated model component. That's how we update the Skybox. Great, so now that we have the logic for the updating the Skybox ready, all we got to do is go back to reality view, and here we create the Skybox when we first show the reality view, and inside the update guy here, we'll call the update Skybox function, which would take in the latest Skybox value, which is set by the buttons in the window, and it would update the created Skybox with that latest Skybox texture. Let's see if this is working. So now we got the window as usual. If I look around, we got the forest now. Now if I change, wow, look at that. We're in a different Skybox now. That looks awesome. And now if I want a different environment, I would click another one. Now we're in a fantasy river. Just look at that. So in this video, we learned how to dynamically change the Skybox of a VR environment in visionOS. And by doing that, we learned a bit about Skyboxes, what they are, and then we learned about how we can generate Skyboxes using AI tools. And we also learned how to communicate between windows and an immersive space so that we can dynamically change the Skybox inside a reality view. That's a lot of things. Do try it out and hope you have fun.